Spiritual food for thought.
Welcome back to Spiritual Food for Thought. I thank you for joining me. At the moment, we're currently looking at verses that people use to attempt to dismiss the fourth commandment, or to say that perhaps the first day of the week has now replaced the biblical Sabbath, or things like that. This one here, I'm going to try just to isolate the verse and look at it, show you a number of reasons why, taken as written, there's no way this could be talking about what people claim it's talking about, and then I'm going to back up and read this in context and show you some more evidence that this has nothing to do with how people like to apply it. But for a very long time, this passage has been used as a proof text. It's been driven into people's heads, so at this point there's so many people fully convinced that this is talking about the Sabbath that it's difficult to undo that if they're not willing to see. So I pray that people would just consider this as some food for thought and carefully examine this. Really think about this. In fact, if I was ever in a debate where somebody was going to be defending a first day of the week, Sunday Sabbath, versus the biblical seventh day Sabbath, I would ask if they believe that Romans 14 applies to the Sabbath. And Romans 14:5 is the go-to verse people often use. It says, "One man esteemeth one day above another, another esteemeth every day alike. Let every man be fully persuaded in his own mind." And if the other person in this hypothetical debate said that they believe this applies to the Sabbath, that one man esteems one day above another, another man esteems every day alike, I would tell them, then you have to obey the rest of the verse as it pertains to what you think this is about. It says, let every man be fully persuaded in his own mind. That means, based on that verse, if they think that applies to this debate, this discussion, they're not allowed to try to change my mind, because they are to let me be fully persuaded in my own mind. I know that really doesn't seem to fit, which is why this is a verse that's not about that. But if we're going to claim it is, we're going to have to hold true to the whole thing, right? So let's just look at this verse first of all. It says, one man esteemeth one day above another. Then it says, another esteemeth every day alike. So first of all, this isn't saying somebody likes this day, somebody likes a different day. It's not saying some people think the Sabbath is on Saturday, some people think on Sunday. One thing that's never mentioned here is the Sabbath. You're not going to find the Sabbath mentioned here. Keep that in mind. Also, it's not talking about one day versus another day. It's one man esteemeth one day above another, another esteemeth every day alike. That's not the subject matter that people try to apply it to. But let's pretend it is. Let's pretend that when one man esteemeth a day, that he's esteeming the Sabbath. Well, let's look at what the Sabbath is, because the person who is esteeming every day alike is going to be esteeming it in the same manner that the person is esteeming one day. So the person esteeming one day, we'll go back to Exodus chapter 20. We're going to read verses 8 through 11. Now we're going to see in which way, if this was the Sabbath, somebody would be esteeming it. So Exodus chapter 20, starting at verse 8, says, "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy." That alone actually dismantles this particular discussion, this particular debate. If you look at it, one man esteems one day above another. If he is esteeming it in a way that he's considering it to be holy or set apart from the other days, then you couldn't set apart all the days. You couldn't esteem every day alike and try to make them all holy, because holy means set apart. If I have 5 apples and I move one apple, or let's say 7, right? We're dealing with 7 days of a week, and I move one apple off to the side, that makes it set apart. I can't take the 7 apples and just move all 7 apples and consider it to be set apart. And it's interesting too, if we back up to Genesis, because it's going to reach there by the time we're done with this passage in Exodus here. But in Genesis chapter 2, right at the beginning of it, it says, "Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the seventh day, God ended his work which he had made, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had made. And God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it. Okay, he made it holy, because that in it he had rested from all his work which God had created and made. So God, the first time there ever was a Sabbath day, the first time there ever was a seventh day, he set that day apart and sanctified it. He put it off to the side. He made it holy. He set it apart. If we continue, though, it gets worse. How does it get worse just by reading this? Let's find out. It says, 6 days thou shalt labor and do all thy work. So again, if the way in which one man is esteeming the day is that he's esteeming it as the Sabbath and saying, I'm not going to work, then the one who's esteeming every day alike is going to be esteeming it in the same manner in which this one day was esteemed. So he's saying he's never going to work again. And I know people's arms will flip. No. No, actually, yeah. If you're going to be consistent that this one day that somebody's esteeming is the Sabbath, on the Sabbath, people do not work who are observing the Sabbath. Therefore, to be consistent, the one who esteems every day alike would have to be saying that he's never going to work again. Now, of course, we know Romans was written by Paul. Paul also wrote 2 Thessalonians. Let's take a real quick peek at some other writings of Paul just to see if that's consistent with Paul's teaching. Here it says in 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, starting at verse 10. For even when we were with you, this we commanded you, that if anyone would not work, neither should he eat. For we hear that there are some which walk among you disorderly, working not at all, but are busybodies. Now them that are such we command and exhort by our Lord Jesus Christ, that with quietness they work and eat their own bread. So you're not even going to be able to make it out of the teachings of Paul and have this verse, esteeming one day and esteeming every day alike, be applied to the Sabbath, because Paul is not going to let anyone not work for a living. But it gets worse. Why? Because if we continue to the way in which somebody would esteem the Sabbath based on when God gives it as one of the 10 commandments here in Exodus 20, says in verse 10, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. Do you remember Genesis chapter 2? First time there ever was a Sabbath? Yes, the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, nor thy manservant, nor thy maidservant, nor thy cattle, nor thy stranger that is within thy gates. So not only am I not going to work ever, if we're esteeming the day the same way, then nobody in my family is ever going to work either, nor am I going to cause anyone else to work. I'm not even going to let people do the work for me. Do you see how irrational and illogical it is to think that the Sabbath, which is not mentioned, is the subject matter at hand? Because when you look at what the Sabbath actually is, it doesn't fit the context. Then it continues and says, for in 6 days the Lord made the heaven and the earth, the sea, and all that in them is, and rested the seventh day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. He hallowed it. He sanctified it. He made it holy. He set it apart. So that's at least 3 reasons why this is not going to be the proper interpretation of Romans chapter 14 when we look at this verse. Now, if we back up and look at it in context, we can find a little bit about what this is talking about. And guess what? As you might have guessed, it's not talking about the law of God. How do we know that? Well, this is Romans, right? What does Paul already tell us in Romans chapter 8? Paul already wrote to the Romans and said, for to be carnally minded is death, but to be spiritually minded is life and peace, because the carnal mind is enmity against God, for it is not subject to the law of God, neither indeed can be. So Paul already laid down this as part of his foundation, that if you think you're not subject to the law of God, you are carnal. You're not being spiritual, but you're carnal, and moreover, you're God's enemy. So in this context of things that he has already revealed in the book of Romans, when we get to 14, we're going to find out how this is not talking about God's law at all. How do we know that? Let's just back up to the beginning of Romans chapter 14, starting at verse 1. Him that is weak in the faith, receive ye, but not to doubtful disputations. For one believeth that he may eat all things. Now, let's check out in context what all things means, because I'm going to tell you right now, all things does not mean, oh, he thinks he can eat syringes, and he thinks he can eat rocks, and he thinks he can eat, knives. All things does not mean all things. Let's find out what it does mean. It says, another who is weak eateth herbs. Herbs meaning only vegetable. So all things here would mean all food. And all food would include some forms of meat and some forms of plants. Why do I say some forms of plants? Because there's certain types of plants that will kill you if you eat them. There's certain types that'll inflame your throat. He's not talking about poison ivy. So he's talking about some meats. Okay, cats and dogs aren't on the list. He's talking about some plants, fruits and vegetables. He continues, okay, and even think about that for a minute. Is there anywhere in the law of God, after Noah and them got off the ark, after they got kicked out of the Garden of Eden, I understand, originally they weren't eating meat. I get that. Before the fall, there was no death. They weren't going to take a bite of a living cow and then continue to let it live, right? Before the fall, before these things were different, but is there anywhere in God's law where it says you only can eat vegetables? No. No, we're not going to find that in his law. You're not going to look through the book of Leviticus. You're not going to look through Deuteronomy and see that you can't eat cows. You can only eat bananas and papayas and broccoli. Not in God's law. So one who is weak in the faith, he doesn't understand God fully. He thinks, maybe I should only eat vegetables. I don't want to eat lamb. Okay? Then it says, let not him that eateth despise him that eateth not, and let not him which eateth not judge him that eateth, for God hath received him. So we have two options here. Number one, we're talking about let not him who eateth vegetables judge him who eats vegetables and meat, or him who eats meat judge him who only eats vegetables. Okay? Or the other one, because of what we see coming forward, is there's actually times when people eat not. Do you know what that's called in the Bible? That's called a time of fasting. And if I was fasting for a specific reason, I wouldn't judge somebody who happens to not be fasting at that time. If somebody else happens to be fasting, they shouldn't judge me for not fasting. It says, who art thou that judgest another man's servant? To his own master he standeth or falleth. Yea, he shall be holden up, for God is able to make him stand. One man esteemeth one day above another, another esteemeth every day alike. Let every man be fully persuaded in his own mind. He that regardeth the day, regardeth it unto the Lord, and he that regardeth not the day, to the Lord doth he not regard it. He that eateth, eateth to the Lord. He that giveth God, for he giveth God thanks. And he that eateth not, to the Lord he eateth not, and giveth God thanks. So here it talks about a day. Where does this day come from? We're talking about meat and vegetables. Then we're talking about not eating or eating. Then a day gets thrown in here. It can't be the Sabbath. I know it never mentions fasting here, okay? But if somebody's not going to be eating, that's called a fast in the Bible. It never mentions somebody not working, and we can see where that's irrational to think so. So, it says somebody regards a day to the Lord, somebody doesn't regard a day to the Lord. Somebody eats, gives God thanks, somebody doesn't eat and gives God thanks. So, if somebody was thinking that a particular day was a good day to fast, he can say that's a special day for him to fast. That's what he's going to do. Do you remember the man praying? One said, Father, forgive me. I'm a sinner. And the Pharisee was standing off and he says, thank you for not making me like that man. He lists his righteousness so-called righteousness. They're like filthy rags, according to Isaiah. But he says, I fast twice a week. There was probably 2 days throughout the week that he would fast on. Why? Because he fasts 2 days a week. It just seems logical to consider that he may have had a repetition with it. And a man like that would regard some days above others, because maybe Tuesday and Thursdays are the days he's fasting. But another man may regard every day alike. He may say, you know what? Any day is a good day to fast if I need to fast and pray. If I need to do something like that, I can do that on any day. What you're going to find as you continue to look through Romans chapter 14 is the law of God isn't really mentioned. Isn't really mentioned. There's not things pertaining to it. One guy later on is considering having a little bit of alcohol. He's drinking some wine. Another is not. Okay, if somebody doesn't have a problem with drunkenness and they drink a little bit of alcohol, there's nothing wrong with that. If somebody chooses not to drink any at all, maybe they used to struggle with drunkenness. I don't like to call it alcoholism. It's not a disease. The root disease is sin. There's one cure for that. That's Jesus Christ. And there is things we can do about it. You're choosing to be enslaved to a sin. The sin is called drunkenness. I was there myself before. But it's not a disease. It's not something you have no control over, and especially with his help. So if somebody did have a problem with drunkenness and they choose not to drink ever again, there's nothing wrong with that. You're not commanded to drink anywhere in Scripture. Talks about eating flesh again in verse 21 as well. It's permissible in the law, but if you want to just eat vegetables, that's okay too. People do that, okay? You're not going to find anything that actually says stuff about the law of God in Romans chapter 14, and especially not about the 10 Commandments. You're not going to find anything pertaining to the 10 Commandments mentioned here. So to think that this is the Sabbath, I get it that it's been driven into people's heads, and they're fully persuaded that this is talking about the Sabbath, and though it's never mentioned, though you can't set apart every day and have them be holy, though it doesn't line up with what the Sabbath is, to esteem one day as a day you're not going to work or make anyone else work, and esteem every day the same way, that doesn't work. It doesn't even match up with the rest of Paul's teachings. And based on what Paul's already revealed in Romans, it doesn't match up to think that he's talking about people rejecting God's law, rejecting one of the 10 Commandments. That doesn't make any sense. So hopefully you can think about this, you can pray about this, you can consider it. Do your own research. Look up Sabbath. You're going to find it's not here. Consider the things I've shared. Again, this is food for thought. I'm just trying to point you in the right direction. You figure out what God actually says, because every man can and will be wrong. Not all the time. But I guarantee you, every church, every denomination, every pastor, every flavor of Christianity has been wrong in the past, and since they're not flawless, they will be wrong in the future. Here or there, it's going to happen. Therefore, learn by the Spirit to understand the Word of God and follow Him, because there's one who cannot lead you astray, our Messiah, Jesus Christ. Be blessed.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.